Today on the Aussie Wire News, we'll uncover what's really going on with this miraculous federal budget surplus. We'll chat with perhaps the most hated man in Australia. And finally, we'll speak with Dr. Aseem Malhotra, who is now the most censored and most feared cardiologist on earth. And he's coming to Australia. All that and more is coming up right now on the Aussie Wire News. Before we get stuck into today's news, I need to let you know that we are giving away 2 tickets to see Dr. Aseem Malhotra on his Australian tour. It's a random prize and entry is only available to our Aussie Wire insiders. There's a link in the description. Become an insider if you want to be in the running to win 2 tickets to see Dr. Aseem Malhotra. Now, let's get on with the news. The Victorian Liberal Party need to learn how to fight like a girl. Specifically, a girl like Moira Deeming. For at least the last 20 years, the Liberal Party of Victoria has existed not to make a positive difference in the world, but simply as a vehicle for ambitious cowards to achieve their selfish objectives. The list of Victorian Liberal Party failures is long and growing fast. Failures in the sense both of events and people. And John Pursuta, the current temporary driver of this slow-motion train wreck, seems determined to learn all the wrong lessons from the worst of the failures who have gone before him. But before we talk about the present catastrophe, we need to go back in history a little bit. In early 1999, Victoria had Premier Jeff Kennett, a controversial but overall very popular Premier, who had dragged the state, sometimes kicking and screaming, out of the 1980s and into the modern world. He was facing his third election as Premier and was universally expected to win. He didn't. And since that shock loss 24 years ago, the Liberal Party of Victoria have won only one single solitary state election. And they won it, thanks in part, and believe it or not, to me. Let me explain. I mentioned it briefly in my editorial last week, and of course my haters, predictably, came out of the woodwork, having absolutely no idea what I was talking about and even less what they were talking about, and called me an egotist and a liar. So let me explain how little old me, the forklift-driving part-time YouTube political commentator that I was back then, is the reason why the Liberal Party of Victoria have their only electoral victory of the 21st century. It's embarrassing. It's the only one. The Liberals won because they picked up a few surprise seats, which combined to carry them to victory by a single seat. One of those unexpected seats was the seat of Seymour, which the Liberal Party won off the back of preferences from a candidate, an independent candidate, named Jan Beer, who ran on a plug-the-pipe platform opposed to the north-south pipeline that was under construction at the time. I worked with Jan in the lead-up to the election to create a video all about the pipe, which Jan used extensively as a weapon during her election campaign. My video attracted tens of thousands of views on YouTube, and remember, we're talking 2010 here. Plus, Jan distributed it widely on DVD because, well, lots of people didn't have fast enough internet to watch YouTube. This was again 2010 in country Victoria. Those DVDs got passed around and, in the end, Jan picked up over 10% of the vote in her electorate. And well done to her and everyone that worked with her. As a result of her 3,738 votes going to the Liberal Party candidate and a preference deal, the Liberals won that seat by just 898 votes. And so it was that the Liberal Party of Victoria's Ted Baillieu won the 2010 election by a single seat. And that seat by less than 1,000 votes. And those 1,000 votes because of preferences from Jan Beer. And she won her votes, in part, thanks to my video. Now, I'm not saying that to pump up my tyres and pretend that I'm a somebody, quite the opposite. I'm saying this to emphasise just how lost the Liberal Party of Victoria really are. If the Liberal Party of Victoria are so useless, so flaccid, so lost, that the only election they've won in this millennium required my help, someone who has not succeeded in any other political endeavour before or since. My help got them over. They are truly, truly lost. The last time the Victorian Liberal Party won an election in their own right without my help was in 1996. Let that sink in. And when they did luck their way into that election win in 2010, all it did was lay bare their cowardice and naked ambition for all to see. Ted Baillieu immediately went back on key election promises like the promise to publicly release multi-billion-dollar public-private partnership contracts so that taxpayers could actually see what it was that we were funding. That promise was broken almost immediately, and that set the tone for a lot of other things going forward. Ted Baillieu and I actually have a lot of mutual friends and acquaintances, and I used to ask these friends before the election, before the 2010 election, where Ted became Premier, I was asking these friends, what's Ted like? Is he going to be any good as a Premier? After all, I was committed to seeing the end of the Brumby government after years of terrible mismanagement and of the water supply by Bracks and Brumby, as well as mismanagement of all sorts of other things. But I wanted to know, if I'm helping this Ted Baillieu guy, then is he going to be any good? So I asked that question 4 or 5 times on separate occasions with different mutual acquaintances, none of whom heard each other's answers. This is important. It was weird. I kept getting almost exactly the same response. It went like this. I would ask, what do you think of Ted? Is he going to be a good Premier? And they would say, and I'm not making this up, I have to emphasise this, they all did this. They would say, he's a nice guy. Their voices would go high-pitched. They'd look up at the sky. They would damn him with faint praise. Nice guy? What does that even mean? And is that something you want in a Premier? Well, in practice, nice guy meant that he lacked any real spine. He stood for nothing. And he was quickly swept aside by Denis Napthine, who went on to fail just as spectacularly as a Premier and was rightly booted out at the next election in favour of none other than Daniel Andrews. Victoria has been stuck with Daniel Andrews ever since, and the consequences of that are obvious for all to see. Daniel Andrews was made possible almost entirely by the abject failure of the Victorian Liberal Party. They are, with only a handful of exceptions, egotistical cowards, convinced of their own greatness and worthiness to rule, but lacking the spine and courage to actually stand for anything when any sort of pressure is applied. They don't know how to fight. But worse, they've forgotten what's worth fighting for. And that's why I say that they need to fight like a girl. Fight like Moira Deeming, because she knows what she's fighting for. The Liberal Party of Victoria is so far gone that they have just torn themselves apart in a mad rush to expel the one principled politician who could have actually led them, shown them the way out of the wilderness and back into an election-winning position. But to accept that truth would require them to put aside their own egos, their own ambitions, and worse, it would require them to find some courage and the strength to actually stand for something. And most of them, they just don't have it in them. For many, if not most, of the Victorian Liberal Party members, the expulsion of Moira Deeming is going to be the last straw, and it should be. This party has not won an election in their own right without my help in 27 years since 1996, and they're now so desperate to win that they've abandoned any and all of their principles in the vain pursuit of some imaginary political centre that always somehow seems to elude them. The truth is, of course, that no one votes for the centre. We vote for a purpose, for a principle. And a party without a clear purpose has already lost. By expelling Moira Deeming, the Liberal Party of Victoria have shown that the only people they're willing to fight are the ones who challenge their fragile egos and expose their cowardice. If they'd shown even half as much fight against Daniel Andrews as what they've shown against an elected MP in their own party, then they might not be stranded in the wilderness. But here we are. I said last week that Victoria has become a one-party state, and I stand by that. I said that it's Daniel Andrews who's destroying Victoria, and again, I stand by that. But this week I want to add that it's the Victorian Liberal Party who made Daniel Andrews possible, even inevitable in some senses. And if they can't set their egos and sense of entitlement to one side and actually start appointing leaders with courage and backbone and fight, then they will forever be lost. Those in leadership need to start by apologising to Moira Deeming and then start paying attention to her. They need to learn how to fight like a girl. News is next. Well, I'm sure you heard all the hullabaloo around the budget. There were all sorts of different write-ups, different people giving their hot takes. As opposed to a hot take, I like my takes nice and cold. I like to take a bit of time, digest what I've seen, and talk to some people that really know what they're talking about. That's exactly what we're going to do with my next guest, Dr. John Humphreys, the Chief Economist for the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. Thank you very much for once again, for the Aussie Wire, taking a moment out of your very busy schedule to talk to us.
G'day, Topher.
Now, we've seen the budget come out. We've seen, obviously, Jim Chalmers was as happy as a pig in mud. I've got some footage of him here. He was so incredibly thrilled with himself to finally be standing up there in Parliament House, delivering on a budget and starting off with all of the usual platitudes and all of that. What would you say are the key takeaways of this budget? We've seen debt being racked up at 1 million miles an hour for decades now, ever since 2008. Oh, not decades, excuse me, nearly 2 decades, ever since 2008 at a federal level. We've seen spending get completely out of control in just the last few years with COVID and all the rest of it. What's your takeaway from this budget?
This budget reminds me a lot of recent years, actually, which is that they gets 1 star for not being as bad as Whitlam or Rudd, but otherwise it is a lost opportunity on a number of fronts. So the first thing I'll note, I'm not sure if this has been widely understood yet, the surplus for the year 22-23, that's not actually the budget year, by the way. The budget year is 23-24, so they're talking about last year. But the surplus is actually in deficit in fiscal terms. So the fiscal budget was a slight deficit. Now and realistically, the cash surplus is a little bit built on smoke and mirrors. They've shuffled spending between years to make it a surplus. Having said that, it is undeniable that the 22-23 year, the budget position improved significantly. And that is a good thing, right? I mean, it could be worse if it was Whitlam or Rudd. As the revenue came in, they could have wasted it all. So I will give them 1 star for as the revenue came in, which they didn't do anything to achieve, but as it came in, they didn't waste it all. So that's the 1 star for the government. It's nice to see that surplus, even if it is partly smoke and mirrors. It is very disappointing to see that the surplus disappears almost immediately into the budget year, 23-24 and beyond. And more than that, and this has been true for most of the last 2 decades, once again, it is a missed opportunity of no microeconomic reform. And as we've discussed previously, nearly every time we talk, you need that microeconomic reform to drive productivity, to drive higher wages. We've had a stagnant economy for a while. We've had stagnant wages for a while. If people ever want to fix that, we have to get serious about microeconomic reform, and that is entirely missing in this budget yet again.
Look, microeconomic reform, I think, is going to have to be a topic for you and I to do a deep dive on to send out to our insiders or something like that. It's not really something we can go too deep into in a 5-7 minute interview. One of the things I do want to note, though, is you've been talking about this for years. I've learned tremendously from you over the years. The importance of balancing a budget and not just running up a credit card until eventually you end up paying for it, either in inflation or taxes or in some way, shape or form. You end up paying that money back, and it can get a lot worse than just having to pay it back. You can end up in all sorts of strife. But it seems to me that the general public have no concept of the problem that can come if a government racks up too much debt. I see the public responding to this budget and celebrating, oh, they're spending money on this and they're spending money on that. I see all of the major political parties, with the Liberal Democratic Party being one of the few exceptions, promising more money. We'll give more money to this, more money to that, more money to that, as though we've got this bottomless pit of the stuff. In that context, given that we're a democracy and people vote for their government, how do we bring a budget back under control if people are just going to vote for more money?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it's something of a political point. It used to be for decades that whichever political party could promise a surplus used to get a payoff. They used to get a political benefit from being able to promise or claim to be the responsible party. And so there used to be an incentive to try and bring in a surplus. If people won't reward good fiscal management, there's very little incentive. I mean, if the voters don't reward good fiscal management, there's very little incentive for a politician to do it, because the other option is that they can just sprinkle the money around. Everyone gets a trinket. And of course, that's people like getting trinkets. That's going to buy them more votes. So it's a very good point. I'm not sure how to fix that at a political level, other than reminding everybody that if we continue sleepwalking towards ever higher debt, that is going to end up being a very dangerous thing. I think, if I may say one more thing on this, the problem with that is, of course, a debt crisis, you get there very slowly. You sneak up on it. I've likened it to, it's like you're walking up to the end of a cliff. You do not want to fall off the edge of the cliff, But every step you take before you fall off the edge of the cliff feels totally safe, right? Every step feels totally safe. So you keep going. The problem we have with the debt cliff is you're walking towards the end of the cliff in the dark. You don't know when the last step is. So it would be very prudent for us to stop walking that way. The truth is, we're probably not at the edge of that debt cliff now. Debt could go higher and it wouldn't ruin this country.
Yeah.
But the problem is not the level of debt we're at now, it's the trajectory we're on. We keep building it up, and we've got some spending pressures built into the budget. The rate of growth of government's health spending, aged spending, and the NDIS spending is unsustainable. It's out of control. It's going up far too high. And that's one of the reasons why you need microeconomic reform to get them under control. But as we mentioned before, both sides of politics have been missing in action to get that under control. So we are just sleepwalking towards a very undesirable location.
Well, that's a wonderfully optimistic outlook you've painted there for us, Dr. Humphreys. I do want to touch on one more thing. We've got very little time left. I want to touch on one more thing, and that is the relationship between inflation and the amount of revenue that the government makes thanks to things like bracket creep. This is something that, again, I did not understand. I learnt this from you. Can you just give us a very quick layman's overview of why inflation and therefore bracket creep can actually help a budget bottom line to appear better and can raise taxes in a very sort of stealthy, unseen kind of way?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. One of the main reasons the government's been able to declare they have a surplus in 22-23 and improve the budget in the out years is bracket creep. Bracket creep is basically a stealth hidden tax increase that we get every year, worth up approximately $10 billion a year of tax increase, which is an insanely high number. And they get away with it because they don't announce it. It happens implicitly. It's built into the system. As wages go up, people get into higher tax brackets. As you get into higher tax brackets, you pay a higher and higher percentage of your income through to the government. And they don't have to pass a new law to do that. It happens automatically. And this is particularly galling when the wage increase is being caused by inflation. So your wages aren't even going up in real terms. You can't buy more things. You're not better off. Your wage goes up with inflation, you're no better off, but you're in a higher tax bracket. And this is bringing in windfall gains to the government. Again, I've got to be fair, this is both sides of government are very aware of this. They gleefully take the windfall, they pocket that $10 billion a year, and occasionally they sprinkle it back to people with new trinkets and expect to be thanked, which is understandable politically. But the honest way to go about it would be to index those tax brackets so that we don't have that bracket creep happening every year. Now, I know you have to go quickly. I wanted to mention one other thing, if I could, and that is we talked about the 22-23 year being in surplus, kind of surplus, pseudo fake surplus, but good enough. The 23-24 year, it really should have been in surplus. And here's the kicker. It could have been. The 23-24 year was about a $14 billion of deficit. How much new spending do you think they announced in that year?
Off the top of my head, yeah.
So if they had simply sat on their hands, I'm not talking about making any cuts here. They could keep all of the old spending rolling forward, not one cut. If they just sat on their hands and spent only 1 year being responsible, 1 year of not putting out new spending, they could have reported an actual, not a fake surplus, an actual surplus in this budget as it should have been and as it could have been. But they couldn't withstand the temptation to sprinkle more and more taxpayers' money around.
Well, you've used the magic word there that answers your own question, the word responsible. That's why they weren't able to do it. Unfortunately, you're quite right. This is a bipartisan problem and something that we're going to have to keep talking about because it's not a problem that's going to go away anytime soon, but that's going to have to do for today. Dr. John Humphreys, Chief Economist for the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, thank you so much for your time today. We'll be chatting with Dr. Aseem Malhotra later in the show, but if you want the chance to win 2 tickets to see him live when he tours Australia in the next few weeks, make sure you become an Aussie Wire insider. Insiders are financial supporters of the Aussie Wire, and in return, you get exclusive content, special giveaways, discounts, and our amazing insider community. Link is in the bio. Become an insider now to be in the running for 2 tickets to see Dr. Malhotra live. Well, here at the Aussie Wire, we're obviously very passionate about the new media, the alternative media, because, well, we are a part of that. And someone else who's been a part of that, a critical part of that, especially if you've been following the news during all the madness that happened in Melbourne during COVID, you would know the name Avi Yemeni. You'd know of Rebel News Australia. Well, he joins me right now for us to talk a little bit of shop. Avi, it's good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Matt, and well done on this new venture.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Look, you led the way in terms of real kind of news reporting. Yes, there were others, but in terms of a structured, a brand with a little bit of sort of resourcing behind you and really getting out there, you hit the streets for stories. There's only a handful of other people in the alternative media that have done that. Chris de Bruin comes to mind more recently with his work up in Sydney, and there are a few others. I'm not trying to pretend you're the only one. But hot damn, did you get in the mix during COVID? We were just talking off air. So you were originally with TR in 2018. Then you started with Rebel. Tell me what happened 2 days into your time with Rebel.
That's right. I signed up to Rebel on the 3rd of September 2020. Mm-hmm. And on the 5th, which was a Saturday, was the infamous protest around Albert Park there. And mm-hmm. I was tackled to the ground. I had my ID in my pocket, and I was, telling them loudly that they could check the permit and the ID, mm-hmm. and I work mm-hmm. for Rebel News. I think they thought at the time I was an easy target because they didn't know I made the switch 2 days earlier, and I was no longer with TR, mm-hmm. and suddenly I had the backing and the resources of this Canadian machine that had learnt how to really take our grassroots viewers and followers, the people that had been following me for all that period. They knew how to activate them on my behalf, and boy, did it work.
Well, look,
because they learned very quickly.
Legend has it that their phone lines melted down, that all sorts of things happened. It was wonderful to see. I mean, you've received apologies now for what they've admitted. Victoria Police, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's my understanding that Victoria Police have admitted to multiple wrongful arrests of you as a journalist.
Absolutely, and apologise for 3 wrongful and unlawful arrests while doing my job reporting. And let me tell you a little secret. To get that word while reporting for Rebel News, the word reporting within the apology, it took an extra 3 months. The heads of Victoria Police had to approve that word. And at the end, they just had to suck it up and accept responsibility, and also referred to what I was doing as legitimate journalism. And guess what? None of the mainstream media have ever really run that. Imagine that in a Western civilization where a police department admit to wrongful and unlawful arrest of what they are calling a journalist. But that's why we're here today.
And multiple times. Look, I think it's become very, very apparent that the alternative media needs to stick with each other. We need to support each other, and this is what we're really enjoying about your approach. You've been very, very welcoming of us as a newcomer on the block compared to yourself and compared to Rebel News Australia. I'm very grateful to you and to Rebel News, to Ezra Levant and the whole team for the incredible work that you guys did during that COVID era. It wouldn't have been possible for someone like me to do what I was doing without having you guys actually getting the other side of the story out there. But that era brought out some really interesting moments and some really interesting people, and it's someone that I think we should acknowledge is going to be Rukshan Fernando, who saw that coming.
I don't want to be in the same recording as that guy.
I know you don't. You hate each other's guts. The feud is palpable. No. But it was just this beautiful moment of citizen journalism. In his case, he didn't have the backing of an outfit like yourself. He didn't have the background of myself with over a decade of political commentary by that point in time. He was just someone who said, I don't like what's happening and someone needs to do something, and I'm going to point a camera at it. How did you get your start? Why did you, that was the catalyst for him. What was the catalyst for you to actually get out there and do something in the first place?
Well, for me, it was actually, honestly, I was a gym owner at the time. I'd finished my military service in Israel, and I came back and I opened a couple of IDF gyms, which was based around Krav Maga, and they were quite popular. And I remember in one of the operations in the Gaza Strip when war broke out, and I remember I didn't even know the difference between left and right. I wouldn't have been able to tell you the difference. I wouldn't have been able to tell you which one Liberal or Labor were. I did not know. I did not really care. I was probably like most Aussies, especially back then. I was apathetic. Yeah. But then when I sat down one night and watched ABC and I saw them reporting on the conflict, and it was they were exactly where I had been stationed for most of my service, and I knew what they were telling was not what the reality was on the ground. So I actually started using my IDF training Facebook page to voice, my experienced opinion about what was really happening, and to tell people what was going on the ground, also from people I know there at the time. And I guess after that had all ended, obviously some people loved me for it. A lot of people hated me for it, the story of my life. But then after that, I think I kind of found my voice, and I go, I don't really like just being a gym owner. I kind of enjoy speaking my mind. And I again, it was a process because I didn't actually know the difference in the political sphere. I knew what I believed in. So I kind of approached everything from a common sense perspective, and I used the Facebook page and until some of my members, not necessarily that they, I don't know really if they agreed or disagreed with some of my positions, but what they said to me is, hey, we love your gym. Maybe you shouldn't be using the pages to voice your political opinions. Now, when it came to Israel, that was one thing that I thought, if you're coming to train at a Krav Maga gym and you don't actually understand the idea of self-defense, and don't worry about it, don't come and learn the Israeli army self-defense system. But with everything else, I thought they had a point, and that's when one of my first Facebook, now long banned, was born, and that's where it started, and it's been a journey. Oh boy, it's been a journey since then.
The rest is history, because you've got 750,000 followers on YouTube. You are among Australia's most successful independent journalists, but there's a bit of a story to YouTube all of a sudden, isn't there, as of last week or so? You just got demonetized?
Oh, no, we've been demonetized for a long time. No,
I must have missed that memo.
We've been demonetized for a long time, yeah. So you're referring to, like all alternative media at the moment, we need to think about how we monetize it. Like our audience have been so good at supporting, whether it's been my legal battles or the legal battles of people in the community that we've been taking on for them or funding, crowdfunding. But when it comes to monetization, where you look at that, you look at the kind of numbers we get in views across YouTube, Facebook, Twitter these days, Rumble, like all the platforms, Instagram, we get millions, yet we're not monetized. So we've been looking recently at different ways to do that, and that was offering our viewers kind of an advertising where they have no editorial input or say, but if they've been watching us for a while and they like what we stand for, and they kind of want to give us a donation that's I guess can be written off as a tax deduction, well, sponsor an ad, and that's where you're getting that from last week. But
so that's what I saw, right? So I do want to say another thing that I'm really grateful for both you and for Rebel News is you've not just reported on the news, but you've also tried to step up and fill gaps where you've seen them. One of the key initiatives from you guys was a thing called Fight the Fines, where you were encouraging people to bring fines related to COVID and protests and opening the stores and these sorts of things, bring them to you. You formed a legal fund and you've helped a lot of people. I've personally referred a number of people to you guys because people have reached out to me and said, Topher, I don't know who to turn to. And I'm like, well, I don't know who to turn to either, but there's Avi Yemeni and there's Rebel News and there's Fight the Fines. Go and have a chat with them. And universally, the reports back have been amazing. As recently as last month, I had a gym owner from down in Sale. His family reached out to me and said, hey, he's being really, really targeted now. Who do we turn to? And again, I said to you, hey, can I send another person your way? But Fight the Fines as an initiative is amazing, but it costs an awful lot of money. And obviously, for a lot of people, they feel like life has moved on. They feel like this is ancient history now. Surely that's all over and done with. Your court cases will attest, my court cases will attest, Nick Patterson's court cases will attest, this gym owner from down in Sale. This is very much a live, real, ongoing fight where a lot of us are still fighting, in my case, against criminal charges and in other people's cases against massive fines. Tell me a bit about Fight the Fines and how people can find you and support you as you help others.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fightthefines.com.au is pretty much where you can follow the stories, the ongoing stories that are still happening today, that are still real, very real for those people that are struggling. And I know a lot, the wider community seems to have moved on, whereas those that were in the thick of it, many of those that were in the thick of it at the time, can't move on because they're still being dragged through the courts. There are several cases that are ongoing and still have a long way to go. But we promised them during the height of it that we wouldn't abandon them. So no matter what, we're not abandoning them. But we encourage people to still get behind those that are fine. Fightthefines.com.au, you can see all the current cases that we're running and a couple of others. But yeah, if you're willing and you're able and you think that this still matters, that the fight for freedom, to ensure that, I think the important point here at this point is that to show those in the community that if it was to ever happen again, that we would unite as a community. And when it's all said and done and the government backs down, that those who stood up, those who bravely stood up, won't be left to pick up the pieces themselves.
Yeah.
And that we will ride it all the way with them. And that's what we're doing. And we're appreciative. There are a lot in the community, in our small community of followers that have been sticking by the people that have, fought all
the way through
until now. Until what are we? 2020? We're in May 2023.
2023
for 3 years.
My criminal court case hasn't even begun yet. We're still doing mention hearings and all kinds of nonsense. Now, I want to disclose I am not receiving support from Fight the Fines. This isn't an indirect way for me to try and get support through to my court cases. We're paying our own court costs out of my family. We're paying for that ourselves. And if we run out of resources and we reach out, we'll do that directly to my audience. We're not going to go through Fight the Fines. This is not about me. This is about a lot of other good people that had the courage to stand up and do what needed to be done. And Avi Yemeni and Rebel News Australia, I'm so grateful that you guys stood up and helped to fill that gap. You've brought so much comfort and so much peace of mind to people who were under the thumb of the system, and you became their refuge. And I really want to encourage anyone, if you want to support that, could you please, what was the website again? Fightthefines.com.au?
Fightthefines.com.au.
There you go. Go there and support these guys. If you are not familiar with Rebel News, Avi's done some amazing work. Recently came back from Alice Springs, was on the ground bringing you a report you will not see on the mainstream media, was on the ground in Davos, again bringing you reports you will not see in the mainstream media. Go to Rebel News Australia and have a good look at Avi's work. Avi, that's all we've got time for today on the Aussie Wire, but thank you so much for joining us. I respect and admire the work that you've done over the last couple of years, and I look forward to chatting with you again.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. All the best. Well, my next guest may have seemingly come out of nowhere. Certainly did for me. I have to admit, I wasn't aware of Dr. Asim Malhotra's incredible work over the previous 10 years before he was on a seminal interview on the BBC. We're going to ask him about that and a whole lot more, including his upcoming trip to Australia right now. Dr. Asim Malhotra, thank you so much for joining us.
Delighted to speak to you, Topher.
Well, I have to... I've only been learning about you recently, and I feel a little bit embarrassed about that because you've got an incredible history. You're an NHS, NIH-trained cardiologist. You've been to Australia twice before, somehow passed me by completely, and you were famously now invited onto the BBC to speak about excess deaths and what may be related to heart conditions and so forth with excess deaths. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and why the BBC invited you on as the expert to talk about cardiology, heart health, and these excess deaths?
Yeah, absolutely, Topher. So I'm a practicing cardiologist. I've been a qualified doctor for well over 20 years. In the last 10 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, I have been really very much involved in public health activism. I've been campaigning on two big issues. One is the obesity epidemic and trying to understand the root cause of it, and then give people solutions. And also something I've been very heavily involved with for many years is exposing the excesses and manipulations of the drug industry and trying to promote what I would describe as ethical, evidence-based medical practice. So that was my background. And then I've done through the activism work, a lot of what I see as a part of that success is trying to get information out to the public.
Sure.
And obviously mainstream media is a great platform for that. That has a potential to reach millions of people. I've written for practically every single newspaper in the UK. I've featured and been on many, many BBC News stories that I have basically created because of my medical journal academic publications on issues such as sugar or saturated fat or statins or low-carb diets, everything really coming back to heart disease. So the BBC actually asked me in January to go on because there had, in the previous few weeks, there had been some guidance that was coming out. Initially, Chief Medical Officer suggested that more people need to take statin drugs to combat heart disease, and it may well have been a reduction in uptake of statins during lockdown, which may be leading to excess heart attacks, but that was proven to be completely false. So the BBC had asked me to comment on this, and during that interview, I actually said, listen, the elephant in the room here is we're ignoring something which is much more concerning. That is the fact that we have very clear, high-quality evidence now linking the COVID mRNA vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna in particular, to heart attacks and myocarditis and heart issues, and is likely a significant contributory factor to the fact that we have a big issue in many countries around the world now of excess deaths, which are to a large degree unexplained. And from my perspective, one clear bit of evidence that shows it must be a factor by far is the vaccine.
Look, it is incredible to think that there was so much fascination about a single COVID death not so long ago, and now we have, last I checked, and my data is a few months out of date, but last I looked at it, 16% thereabouts excess deaths happening in Australia right now, and a complete lack of curiosity from the powers that be as to what might be contributing to that. And of course, when someone like yourself comes forward with, not that my opinion matters, but I tend to agree. What I've seen is very compelling evidence making it possible or even likely that there is a contributing factor there, and yet there's this complete lack of curiosity. It's quite incredible. So, Doctor, a lot of the censorship has been focused, at least superficially, around the claims around the 30,000 excess deaths as a result of heart conditions and heart-related issues in the UK. But of course, for you, this is intrinsically tied up with the story of your own father's passing in 2021. You had, I can't imagine how difficult this would be, but you had the task of actually looking at your own father's autopsy, and you released a report on that's been peer-reviewed, in which you concluded that the mRNA vaccines contributed to his death. How does it feel now to have the professional and the personal and to see the censorship of what is really such a personal story for you?
To be honest, Topher, it's to be expected as well. I mean, in my opinion, fact.org or fact checkers or whatever else are really written by psychopaths for psychopaths. And I'll expand on that in a second. But coming back to my paper, it was published in the peer-reviewed International Journal of Insulin Resistance. It was a 10,000-word piece, 2 parts, because I could walk people through the whole process of the fact that even myself, being empathetic to people that are still, unfortunately, indoctrinated around the safety of the COVID vaccines, I was one of those people. I was completely indoctrinated into thinking this would be safe and effective. I did not expect or think that vaccine could do so much harm. And part of that story, of course, is my dad's own case study, again, which went through peer review and was accepted by the peer reviews as being reasonable in the sense that I suggested that likely cause of his death or primary precipitating factor was a COVID mRNA vaccine. But that's something that I have probably led on in the world in actually making the link between how the mRNA vaccines can what we call accelerate coronary artery disease. And the reason I was able to do that is because I myself have been at the forefront of changing the understanding of heart disease. I published a paper with 2 internationally renowned cardiologists in 2017 in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, where we describe coronary artery disease as being a chronic inflammatory condition that can be helped by lifestyle changes. So there's very few people probably in the world that was able to understand that, and then also, in addition, speak out about it. That put me in a very unique position, and I had to then act upon it, and that's what happened through the journal. Yeah.
Look, it's a difficult position to be in. What are you finding is the reaction now from your own colleagues, your own other people in your own profession? Are you finding yourself marginalised and rejected at that professional level as well, or are they showing at least more curiosity and more willing to consider what you've got to say?
To be honest, the shift is only going in one direction, Topher, and that is that more and more doctors, cardiologists are aware that there is an issue. But the problem is most of them are scared to speak out because the system, unfortunately, doesn't encourage that safety of speaking the truth. So they've been privately messaging me, telling me they support me, telling me to keep going. But they themselves, I had a conversation with a very senior cardiologist in the NHS yesterday. And he said to me, Asim, the problem we've got is, doctors are in a position where they have to choose between their patient and their career. That's where we've got to. And they're choosing their career or their self-interest over the patient because they are scared. So we have to have an honest conversation about that, and try and make sure that we address this at the root cause, these system failures. And the reason I said psychopath, Topher, is that I've come up with this new term, which is actually referenced in The Lancet by Richard Horton, the editor-in-chief of The Lancet, who came to one of my talks in London. And it's called the psychopathic determinants of health. What does that mean? Big, powerful corporations who are only interested in profit, not giving you the best treatment, in this case, Big Pharma, often as legal entities behave in a psychopathic way in order to make money. But the problem is they have got control over regulators, over academic institutions, over medical journals, and they've got more power than they've ever had. So when we address this and understand it at its root, we can then unravel all of these issues that are going on at the moment and get to a greater truth. And that's what we want to do.
Well, Doctor, I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat. I'm looking forward to meeting you when you come here into Australia. Now, the Australian Medical Practitioner Society has brought you out for a speaking tour. I'm very, very excited about this. I've got their website here where they are, tickets are available on sale right now. I'm actually going to be emceeing your event in Perth, which I'm really looking forward to. I've been invited to head across there and to MC 2,500 seat event at the Perth Convention Centre on June the 10th. But of course, all the other dates are on the AMPS website as well. What is your main message that you're bringing to the world now? You've talked about the fact that you've been trying to talk to the world for over 10 years on these issues. What's the message that you're bringing to us in Australia?
To be honest, Topher, really the simple principle that I'm trying to promote here is ethical evidence-based medical practice. That's something that is very much at the heart of AMPS, who's invited me to come and speak in Australia, the Australian Medical Professional Society. Very courageous doctors and nurses, other healthcare practitioners who decided that they did not want to take the vaccine. And unfortunately, they lost their jobs because of it, many of these people. And it's absolutely, it's criminal. And I think people need to understand the truth of what's really going on. And, that is the solution to get us out of this place we're in right now, which is something that I would only describe as being in hell. I mean, people's mental and physical health is deteriorating. And part of the solution to that problem is getting information to people in a transparent and open way, free from commercial influence, and reforming the system. This is a system failure that has been creeping up on us for a couple of decades and is now, resulting in a complete meltdown of healthcare in many parts of the world. So that's really what I want to be talking about in my tour and offering meaningful solutions to the problems as well. And what does that mean? Ultimately, removing conflicts of interest over health.
Well, Dr. Naseem Malhotra, thank you so much for this interview. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I do look forward to hanging out with you in Perth and possibly in one or two other cities as well as you tour around Australia. Thank you so much for your time today. We'll put the link for the tickets to see Dr. Malhotra in Australia into the show notes. Dr. Malhotra, thank you so much for your time. That's all for today on the Aussie Wire. As always, there's links in the description if you want to find out more about our guests or about any of our stories. If you want the chance to win 2 tickets to see Dr. Malhotra live in Australia, then become an Aussie Wire insider today. The link is in the description. And if you've missed any past episodes, go to theaussiewire.com to catch up. New episodes of the Aussie Wire news drop every Thursday and Tuesday at 4 p.m. Thanks for your incredible support for the Aussie Wire. It is our privilege to be your connection to the truth. I'm Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.